Briggs grabbed her tray with one hand and hurled it across the mess hall. It hit the floor like a gunshot. Eggs, coffee, everything scattered across the linoleum in front of 200 silent Marines. Then he grabbed Maya Carter by the collar of her uniform and shoved her backward into the serving counter, hard enough to rattle every tray on the rack. The room exploded with laughter. Briggs put his face 6 inches from hers. "Logistics girls eat last," he said, "or they don't eat at all." Maya Carter didn't grab her collar, didn't look at the mess on the floor, didn't look at the laughing Marines. She looked only at Briggs, calm, precise, measuring him the way a surgeon measures a cut before making it. He had just made the last mistake of his career. He just didn't know it yet. Subscribe and drop your city below. I want to see exactly how far this story reaches. The morning Maya Carter walked into Naval Base Redstone, nobody looked twice. That was exactly how she planned it. She moved through the main gate at 0645, carrying a single regulation duffel and a set of transfer orders so clean and unremarkable that the gate guard barely glanced at them before waving her through. Logistics officer. Temporary assignment. 30-day evaluation period. Everything about the paperwork said ordinary. Everything about the paperwork was designed to say ordinary. The base was mid-sized and loud. The kind of installation that had enough Marines rotating through it to guarantee nobody ever really knew who belonged and who was passing. There were 2 permanent infantry battalions, a signals unit, a quartermaster section, and enough support staff that a new face drew about as much attention as a change in the weather. Maya had chosen it deliberately. She had spent 3 days studying the base layout before she arrived. Satellite imagery access road schedules, mess rotation times training calendars. She knew which corridors were busy and which ones emptied out by 1800. She knew which senior NCOs ate early and which ones lingered over coffee. She knew that Staff Sergeant Colton Briggs held court in the center section of the main mess hall every morning at 0700, surrounded by whatever group of younger Marines currently orbited his reputation like they were afraid to drift too far. She had read his service file twice. Briggs had 12 years in the Corps. 2 combat deployments. A Silver Star that he mentioned in conversation, approximately once every 48 hours, according to 3 separate accounts she had reviewed. He was physically exceptional, 6'2", 220 pounds of dedicated physical training, and he ran his junior Marines through workouts so intense that 2 of them had required medical attention in the past 8 months. Both incidents had been filed. Neither had resulted in disciplinary action. That told her something. Not about Briggs specifically. About the command environment that allowed it. Her assignment. Her real assignment. The one that didn't appear anywhere in those neat transfer orders was a leadership evaluation commissioned quietly through Naval Special Warfare Command. Someone high enough up the chain had noticed a pattern in the reports coming out of Redstone. Not dramatic failures. Not criminal conduct. Something quieter and more dangerous. A culture of selective enforcement where physical dominance was being rewarded and quiet competence was being systematically ignored. Maya's job was to find out how deep it ran, and she was very, very good at her job. She had been doing this kind of work for 5 years, embedded in various commands across 3 branches of service, always in a cover identity, always positioned as someone easy to overlook. The methodology was simple and brutal. Show up as nobody. Observe what happens. Document who protects the vulnerable and who steps on them. Report everything. The thing nobody ever told her when she started was how exhausting it was to be invisible. Not the operational exhaustion. She was trained for that. It was the other kind, the kind that built up slowly when you spent weeks watching people treat other people badly and you couldn't say anything yet. When your training told you to observe and your instincts told you to intervene, and you had to hold both of those things in tension until the moment was right. She was good at holding tension. She had learned that in places that had no name on any public map. The mess hall at Redstone opened at 0630, and the early crowd was always the same. Marines who ran before breakfast and needed fuel. A handful of officers who preferred to eat before the room filled up, and the kitchen staff who treated the whole operation with the professional detachment of people who had fed thousands of soldiers and had long since stopped thinking of it as anything other than math. Maya joined the line at 0655. She was in her duty uniform, clean-pressed, correct in every detail, but she wore no combat decorations because her actual awards were classified, and the ones available for her cover story were deliberately modest. A service ribbon, a letter of commendation that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know what it was actually for. She looked like someone who had spent her career pushing paper in a climate-controlled building somewhere far from anything dangerous. That was the point. She took her tray and moved through the line without conversation. Eggs, toast, coffee black. She had positioned herself to take a table near the east wall. Good sightlines, natural traffic flow close enough to the main seating area to hear conversations without being in the middle of them. She had made it approximately 10 feet from the serving counter when she stepped slightly to her left to allow a lance corporal carrying an overfull tray to pass without collision. It was a small, unremarkable act, a reflex of spatial awareness. The kind of thing you did automatically when you had spent enough time in confined environments with other people carrying weapons. "Hey!" The voice came from her right, loud, calibrated to carry. She recognized the technique before she turned. A voice used at that volume in a crowded room was a performance. It wasn't meant just for the person being addressed. It was meant for everyone within earshot. She turned. Briggs was standing 6 feet away, a coffee cup in one hand. 3 junior Marines arranged just behind him in the loose formation of people who had learned to position themselves near someone powerful and hope proximity transferred. I was looking at her the way she had seen certain men look at certain situations, with the comfortable certainty of someone who had never had that certainty tested in a way that stuck. "You're cutting the line, officer." Maya looked at the line. She looked at the position she had been in. She looked at the space she had moved into. "I wasn't," she said. 2 words. Even. No apology attached to them, but no aggression either. Briggs's expression flickered. He had expected one of 2 responses: defensiveness or apology. Either one would have given him something to work with. What she had given him was nothing, just a flat, accurate statement of fact, and something about that bothered him in a way he couldn't immediately identify. "You stepped out of the line and came up beside me," he said. "I stepped sideways to let Lance Corporal." She glanced at the young Marine who had passed to let him through without dropping his tray. "I haven't moved forward. You can count the floor tiles if that helps." Someone near the back of the room made a sound that was almost a laugh before swallowing it. Briggs heard it. His jaw tightened. "You got some mouth on you for a log officer." "I have an accurate account of what happened," Maya said. "That's different from having a mouth." She turned back toward her original direction. That was when Briggs closed the distance. She felt him before she heard him move, a particular displacement of air, a change in the acoustic pressure of the room that happened when a large body moved quickly toward a smaller one. It was the kind of thing you learned to sense in environments where sensing it half a second late could mean the difference between walking away and being carried. She didn't turn around. She waited. His hand hit her shoulder from behind, not a grab, a shove, and the impact was hard enough that her tray lurched forward and the momentum took it out of her hands. Eggs hit the floor. Coffee scattered. The tray itself slid 3 feet across the linoleum with a sound like a gunshot in the suddenly quiet room. Every conversation in the mess hall stopped. Every head turned. Maya stood still. She did not stumble. She had taken the impact and distributed it through her frame the way she had been trained to do, and her feet had not moved, and she had not fallen, and that more than anything else was the first thing that registered as wrong to the people watching. Someone that small hit that hard should have gone forward. She didn't. She looked down at the tray. She looked at the coffee spreading across the floor. She looked at the eggs that had been perfectly fine 30 seconds ago. Then she raised her head and looked at Briggs. The room was completely silent. The kind of silence that happened not because people were being polite, but because they were genuinely waiting to find out what came next, and nobody wanted to miss it by making noise. Briggs was grinning, but it was a grin with something uncertain behind it. Because she wasn't crying. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't doing anything he recognized as a normal response to being publicly humiliated by someone twice her size in front of 200 people. She was just looking at him. And the look was not anger. It wasn't embarrassment. It was something he couldn't read, and that made it the most unsettling thing anyone had ever directed at him in 15 years of military service. "Clean that up," he said. His voice was loud again. Back to performance. Covering the uncertainty. "Accidents happen," Maya said. "I'll get someone from the kitchen." I said, "Clean it up yourself." And I said, "I'll get someone from the kitchen." She paused. "That's their job. This is their workplace. I'm not going to take work away from people who get paid to do it." A different kind of silence fell over the room, because that was not a defensive response. That was a principled one. And several people in that room felt themselves recalibrate something internal without quite understanding why. Briggs was not finished. That was the thing about men who operated primarily through the mechanism of public pressure, when the pressure didn't work the way it was supposed to. Their instinct was always to apply more of it rather than question the method. He stepped closer. Close enough that he was inside the standard boundary of personal space. Close enough that it was technically a form of aggression, even if no lawyer would call it that. "You think you belong here," he said, quieter now. Private conversation, but not private enough that the people nearby couldn't hear every word. "On this base," Maya said. "Yes, my orders are current." "That's not what I'm asking." "I know what you're asking," she said. "I'm choosing to answer the question you actually asked instead of the one you meant." Briggs stared at her. "You've got some nerve." "I've got a factual basis for my presence," she said. "I'm not sure those are the same thing." He grabbed her arm. Not gently. Not the way you grab someone to guide them. The way you grab someone to move them somewhere they haven't agreed to go. "You're going to finish your meal somewhere else," he said. "Officer." He said the word the way certain people used it, as an insult, as a euphemism for everything they actually wanted to say. Maya looked down at his hand on her arm. She looked back up at him. "Staff Sergeant," she said, and her voice had changed. Not louder, not angrier. Something more precise, something focused. "I would strongly recommend you let go of my arm." "Or what?" The room leaned in. Even the people in the back who couldn't quite hear were watching, reading the body language, trying to figure out what was happening. "Or we'll find out the answer to that question," Maya said. "And I don't think either of us wants to do that in front of breakfast." Briggs tightened his grip and pulled. It was a mistake. What happened next lasted approximately 4 seconds. Later, people would try to describe it to others who hadn't been in the room, and they would struggle because the words they reached for didn't quite fit. It wasn't a fight. There was no exchange of blows. There was no dramatic moment of violence. There was just suddenly a different arrangement of the physical world. Briggs's hand was on Maya's arm, and then it wasn't. His balance, which had been entirely certain half a second ago, became uncertain in a way that had no obvious cause. His body shifted in a direction he hadn't chosen, and he found himself taking a step to regain equilibrium that he shouldn't have needed to take, and his coffee cup, which he'd been holding in his other hand, hit the floor with a crack of ceramic. Maya stood exactly where she had been standing. She had not moved her feet. She had not raised her voice. She had not in any visible, describable way done anything aggressive. But Briggs's grip was gone, and he had taken an involuntary step backward, and his coffee was on the floor, and there were 200 Marines in that room who had all seen it, and not a single one of them could have told you exactly how it happened. The room was not just silent now. The room had stopped breathing. Briggs straightened. His face had gone through 3 different emotions in the last 2 seconds, and none of them were ones he was comfortable being seen having. "What the—" "I moved my arm," Maya said. Conversational, almost gentle. "That's all." "That's not—" "It's a fairly basic technique. Most people learn it in the first month of close quarters training." She tilted her head slightly. "I don't mean that as an insult. It's genuinely foundational." The Marine who had been standing closest to Briggs, a corporal named Tate, 19 years old, and 3 months into his first deployment rotation, took a step back. Not because he'd been told to. because something in his body had processed what his brain was still catching up to. The woman wasn't afraid. She had never been afraid. And that meant something he couldn't name yet, but could feel in the way you feel the temperature change before you understand that the weather has shifted. So, Gunnery Sergeant Harold Odom had been eating breakfast in the far corner of the mess hall for 22 years of service, and in that time, he had developed the particular quality of stillness that certain experienced soldiers develop, a kind of comprehensive awareness that looked from the outside like a man paying attention to nothing, and was in fact a man paying attention to everything. He had been watching Maya Carter for 4 minutes before Briggs ever opened his mouth, not because he'd recognized her, because of the way she moved. He had been in enough places with enough people to know the difference between someone who was physically trained and someone who had been physically used. Training looked like confidence. It looked like precision. It looked like deliberate technique. Survival looked different. Survival looked like a person who always knew where every exit was before they found a seat, who positioned themselves with natural sightlines as a reflex, not a decision, whose eyes moved through a crowd not in the way of someone searching for a face they knew, but in the way of someone continuously running a quiet threat assessment and finding nothing worth acting on yet. Maya Carter had been doing all three of those things from the moment she walked in. Odom had flagged it internally and continued eating his eggs and said nothing, because in his experience, when someone was very deliberately appearing ordinary, the best thing you could do was let them be ordinary and see what happened. What happened was Briggs. Odom watched the shove, watched the spilled tray, watched the 200 Marines react with the uncomfortable laughter of a crowd that knows something is wrong but hasn't yet decided which direction to push the discomfort. And he watched Maya Carter not fall, not flinch, and spend the next 4 minutes methodically dismantling Staff Sergeant Colton Briggs's sense of reality, using nothing more than accurate sentences and one extremely precise movement of her arm. He set down his fork. He picked up the black coffee mug. He took a long sip. He said to no one in particular. Briggs was trying to recover. He was not doing it well. "You want to explain what that was?" he said. His voice had lost some of its performance quality. It was more personal now, more confused. "I already did," Maya said. "It's a basic release technique. Nobody moves like that who's been sitting in a logistics office." "I didn't say I'd been sitting in a logistics office," she said. "I said I'm assigned to logistics. Those aren't the same thing." Briggs stared at her. Several of the younger Marines were doing something they probably hadn't done in a long time in Briggs's presence. They were thinking independently about what they were seeing, looking at it straight, trying to fit it into what they understood about the world, and finding that it didn't quite fit. "Who are you?" Briggs said. It came out more honest than he intended, less aggressive, more genuine. Maya looked at him. "Right now," she said. "I'm a logistics officer waiting for someone to help clean up the breakfast I just lost." She looked around the room. 200 Marines looked back at her. And then, before anyone could say anything else, a young lance corporal, the same one she had stepped aside for earlier, quietly walked to the supply station near the kitchen door and came back with a mop. Nobody told him to. Nobody ordered it. He just did it. And the simple, unremarkable act of one young Marine doing the right thing when nobody expected it, that more than anything else that had happened in the last 10 minutes, was the thing that Maya Carter wrote down in her memory as the most important data point of the morning. Not Briggs, the lance corporal. She noted his rank insignia. She noted his face. She noted the quiet certainty with which he'd acted without making a performance of it, without looking around to see if anyone would approve. That was what she was actually here to find. That was always what she was actually here to find. Briggs pointed at her. "This isn't over," he said. His voice had recovered some of its edge. The crowd was still there. The performance still needed a curtain line. "Staff Sergeant," Maya said. "Everything in this room has been witnessed by everyone in this room. At this point, the conversation we're having exists in 160 separate memories simultaneously." She paused. "I'd consider what you want those memories to contain." Briggs stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out of the mess hall. Not dramatically, not with any particular authority, He just left, and the 3 Marines who had been orbiting him followed, because that was what they did. The room stayed quiet for another 5 seconds. Then someone at a table near the windows said something to someone else, and the sound level came back up, and people went back to their food, and the mess hall returned to something that looked like normal. But it wasn't normal. Everyone in that room knew it. It felt like a room where the floor plan had quietly shifted 3 inches to the left, and nobody was entirely sure yet whether they were imagining it. Gunnery Sergeant Odom watched Maya pick up a fresh tray, go back through the line, and take her seat near the east wall. She ate her breakfast, methodically, unhurried. She didn't look around to see how people were watching her. She didn't need to. She already knew. The rest of the morning passed without incident, at least on the surface. Maya attended the logistics briefing she was scheduled for and said nothing that wasn't required. She answered questions accurately and without embellishment. She sat in the back of the room and took notes by hand, which was slightly unusual for someone of her apparent generation, but not unusual enough to comment on. After the briefing, she walked the perimeter of the base. Not the official perimeter, the interior one. The way people actually moved between buildings. The paths that showed up from use rather than from planning. She was measuring something that couldn't be measured on a map, the shape of a community. The informal architecture of a command culture. Who walked with whom? Who held doors? Who didn't acknowledge enlisted Marines when they passed? Who stopped to answer questions from people lower in rank? She spent 40 minutes doing this and made no written notes. She didn't need to. She had a memory trained to retain exactly this kind of information. At 1400, her secure phone vibrated once. A message from the only contact who knew her actual assignment. 2 words. How's it? She typed back 3 words. As expected. Worse. A pause. Then Briggs. She thought about the mess hall. The shove. The tray on the floor. The laughter. The lance corporal with the mop. She thought about 200 Marines who had watched a woman be physically shoved by a superior and responded with laughter, except for one 20-year-old kid who had done the right thing so quietly that half the room probably hadn't noticed. Briggs is a symptom, she typed. I need to find the disease. Another pause. Timeline. She put the phone in her pocket and looked across the training field where a group of young Marines were running drills in the afternoon heat. She thought about everything she had seen in 7 hours on this base. She thought about what it meant and what it would cost and what it was going to take to document it clearly enough that the people above her pay grade would have to act on it. She took out the phone again. Give me 30 days, she typed. You've got 25, came the reply. Maya put the phone away and watched the Marines run their drills. 25 days. She had built entire cases in less than that. But something about this one felt different. Not harder. Different. Like pulling a thread and feeling the whole fabric shift in response, rather than just one section unraveling. There was more here than Briggs. There was something in the architecture of this place that had been quietly teaching people the wrong lessons for long enough that it had started to feel like the right ones. Finding it, naming it, proving it beyond the kind of doubt that powerful people hid behind when they didn't want to be accountable. That was the job. That was always the job. She turned and walked back toward the barracks. Behind her, the training field filled with shouted commands and the rhythmic sound of boots hitting ground. And somewhere in the middle of it, a voice she would have recognized anywhere. Briggs running his unit through a session that by any reasonable measure went 30% harder than regulations allowed, was counting cadence with the particular enthusiasm of a man who had decided the morning's setback was something to work off rather than something to examine. She noted the time. She noted the intensity. She added it to the list she was keeping in the precise, indelible record of her memory. And she kept walking. That night, in the small room she'd been assigned in the visiting officer quarters, Maya sat at the desk and opened her secure notebook. Not digital physical. A bound field journal with water-resistant pages and ink that didn't smear. Classified equipment for a classified job. She wrote for 40 minutes. Not narrative. Not impressions. Numbers, names, times, specific observed behaviors linked to specific contexts. The vocabulary of institutional analysis. Cold, precise, unemotional on the page, in a way that was its own form of discipline. When she finished, she closed the notebook and sat in the dark for a while. She thought about the mess hall. She thought about this moment right after Briggs left, when the room went back to normal, and how that was actually the most important thing she'd witnessed all day. Not the confrontation, but the recovery. How fast people went back to their coffee and their eggs. How the discomfort dissolved because resolving it felt too hard, and the food was getting cold, and it was easier to just continue. Easier to continue was how cultures like this survived. Not through dramatic enforcement, through the accumulated weight of small daily decisions to not make it someone's problem today. She thought about the lance corporal with the mop. Thought about the expression on his face, not heroic, not dramatic. Just the simple, almost apologetic look of someone who had noticed that something needed doing and had done it without turning it into a statement. She had seen that look before. She had been looking for it. In every command she'd been embedded in. In every culture she'd been sent to evaluate. She had been looking for the people who did the right thing quietly, without audience, without expectation of reward. Because those were the people worth building something around. Those were the people who could carry a unit through the kind of moment that broke the ones who only knew how to perform strength. She wrote down his name from the tag she'd read that morning. Underlined it. Not because she was going to do anything with it yet, but because names mattered, and the right ones needed to be remembered. She closed the notebook and sat in the dark a while longer, listening to the bass settle around her distant generators, the rhythm of a guard rotation, the particular quiet of a military installation at night, which was never really quiet, but had a specific frequency that was different from civilian silence. She had 17 years of service. She had been in 4 countries whose names she couldn't say in public. She had done things that had no paperwork and left no trace except in the classified files that only 3 people in her chain of command had ever fully read. And tomorrow she would wake up and put on a clean uniform and walk into another day as a logistics officer whom nobody took seriously. She was very good at this job. She was very tired of needing to be. But she wasn't done yet. Not even close. The Lance Corporal's name was Danny Reyes. Maya had looked him up that same night, not through any special access, just the base roster that any officer could pull. And what she found was exactly what she expected from someone who quietly grabbed a mop when 200 other people were deciding it wasn't their problem. 21 years old. Clean record. Consistently strong performance evaluations that used words like reliable and steady, and conscientious words that in a military culture obsessed with aggression and volume got a person exactly nowhere. He had been passed over for promotion once already. His evaluating NCO had written that he lacked the assertiveness necessary for leadership advancement. Maya read that line 3 times. Then she set it aside and went to sleep because she had learned a long time ago that anger was only useful when you could aim it at something. And at 2300, the only thing anger was going to hit was her own rest cycle. She needed to be sharp tomorrow, because Briggs wasn't going to let the mess hall go. She had known that since the moment he walked out. Men like Briggs didn't process a loss and move forward. They processed a loss and began planning the reclamation. It was one of the things that made them effective in certain contexts and catastrophically dangerous in others. The same quality that made them refuse to quit on a difficult objective made them refuse to quit on a personal grudge. You had to know the difference. Most of the people above Briggs on this base apparently hadn't noticed that distinction yet, or had noticed and decided it wasn't worth the friction of addressing. That was the disease she'd mentioned in her text, not Briggs himself. The tolerance. She was up at 0500 ran, her usual 6 miles on the back perimeter route, and was showered and in uniform by 0630. She ate breakfast early before the main crowd arrived and spent the time reviewing everything she'd written the night before and adding 3 items she'd remembered in the night, the way you always remembered things, in the half space between sleep and waking. By 0700, she was in the logistics office at the desk. They'd assigned her, looking entirely like a woman who had nothing more pressing to think about than supply chain inventory. The first sign came at 0840. A corporal. She didn't recognize, stopped at the doorway to the office, looked at her, and left without saying anything. 20 minutes later, a different Marine did the same thing. Not subtle. Not intended to be subtle. Reconnaissance conducted with all the finesse of someone who had been told to go look at something and report back, but hadn't been told how to do it without being obvious. Briggs was building a picture. Maya continued reviewing inventory reports. At 1:05, Sergeant First Class Andrea Ruiz came in with a stack of actual logistics files that needed actual processing and dropped them on the corner of Maya's desk with the particular energy of someone who had been told something negative about the person they were dropping files on and was still withholding judgment. "Carter," she said. "Ruiz," Maya said. "Heard you had a rough morning yesterday." "Heard or saw?" Ruiz paused. "Heard. I wasn't there." "It wasn't rough," Maya said. "It was clarifying." Ruiz looked at her for a long moment. She was in her mid-30s, with the kind of face that had been outdoors in difficult weather enough times that the lines around her eyes went all the way deep, and the kind of posture that said she had been carrying more than her share of something for longer than she wanted to. "Briggs has a long memory," Ruiz said. "So do I. That's not a warning I give to people I think can't handle themselves," Ruiz said carefully. "It's a warning I give to people who are about to find out that handling yourself and surviving a command environment are two different skill sets." Maya set down the inventory report she'd been reviewing. "How long have you been here?" she said. 3 years. "And in those 3 years, how many people have you given that warning to?" Ruiz was quiet for a moment. "Enough. How many of them stayed?" Another pause. Longer. "Not enough," Ruiz said. Maya looked at her steadily. "Then why are you still here?" It was a direct question, and she watched Ruiz decide in real time how to answer it. Saw the woman run through 3 or 4 possible responses and discard each one before landing on the truth. "Because somebody has to be," Ruiz said. Maya nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "That's an answer I understand." The first real move came at 13:30. Maya had been called into the office of Major Dennis Calloway, the senior logistics officer whose name appeared on her cover assignment orders. Calloway was the kind of officer who had reached his rank primarily through organizational persistence and the careful avoidance of anything that might result in a negative evaluation. He was not corrupt. He was not malicious. He was the most dangerous thing in any institutional system, a man of mediocre courage who had made an entire career out of not noticing things he didn't want to deal with. He closed the door behind her. That told her something. "Carter," he said, settling behind his desk with the particular arrangement of papers that people used when they wanted to appear busy in a meeting they had called. "I've had a complaint." "About the mess hall incident," she said. He glanced up. "You're not surprised." "No. Staff Sergeant Briggs has filed an incident report." Calloway slid a single sheet across the desk. "He's alleging that you used unauthorized physical contact during an altercation." Maya looked at the report without picking it up. She read it in about 15 seconds. "He grabbed my arm first," she said. "He says you initiated contact. There are approximately 200 witnesses who can speak to the sequence of events." "Carter. Major." Her voice was even, not confrontational, just precise. "I want to be very clear about something. I am not going to characterize what happened as a misunderstanding, because it wasn't. Staff Sergeant Briggs physically shoved a fellow officer in a public facility and then attempted to physically remove me from that facility by force. I responded with the minimum technique required to disengage. That is the accurate account. I'm not going to sign anything that says otherwise." Calloway looked at her the way men looked at problems they had hoped would solve themselves. "He's a Silver Star recipient," he said. "So am I," Maya said. The room got very quiet. Calloway blinked. "Your file doesn't list?" "My file lists what it's supposed to list," she said. He stared at her. She watched him process it and decide not to pursue it, which was exactly the decision she expected him to make. and exactly the kind of decision that had been making this base what it was for however long it had been being made. "I'll keep this on file," Calloway said finally. "For now, I'd encourage you to keep your head down and—" "Major," she stood. "With respect, the advice to keep my head down is the advice that created the environment that produced this morning's incident report. I don't mean that as criticism of you personally. I mean it as an observation about a system." She tucked her chair back under the desk. "I'll keep doing my job." She walked out. Behind her, she heard Calloway exhale the particular sound of a man who had just had a conversation he was going to spend the rest of the day trying not to think about. What Maya had not expected was Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Keene. She had read Keene's file the way she read every senior officer's file before an assignment. Keene ran the base's combined training operations, a large complex portfolio that put her in contact with every unit on Redstone on a rotating basis. Her evaluations were consistently strong. Her career trajectory was correct but unremarkable. Nothing in the file stood out as either a red flag or a particular point of interest, which was why Maya was surprised when Keene fell into step beside her in the corridor outside Calloway's office. "Carter," she said without preamble. "Walk with me." Maya walked. Keene didn't speak until they were outside away from the building in the open air, where conversations couldn't be captured by anything without significant effort. "I watched the footage from the mess hall," Keene said. Maya kept her expression neutral. "They told me the cameras in that section were on a maintenance cycle." "Two of them were," Keene said. "One wasn't. I keep that one on a separate maintenance schedule, for situations like yesterday." She paused. "I've been keeping it on a separate schedule for about 8 months." 8 months. Maya ran through the math quickly. 8 months was approximately when the second medical incident involving one of Briggs's Marines had been filed and subsequently closed without action. Someone had expected something to happen and prepared to capture evidence of it when it did. She looked at Keene sideways. "How much did you get?" she said. "Enough." Keene's voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, not anger exactly, more like the particular exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a piece of evidence and waiting for the right moment to use it, and wasn't sure if that moment had arrived or not. "The shove, your response. Briggs's face when you didn't go down." "That footage can't be used by you directly," Maya said. "Not without triggering a review of why it was kept off the official maintenance log, I know." "So why are you telling me—" Keene stopped walking. She looked at Maya with the kind of directness that had nothing performative in it. Just one person deciding to be honest with another because the alternative had stopped being acceptable. "Because I've been trying to handle this through proper channels for 8 months, she said. "And in 8 months, I've generated 4 complaints, 2 formal reviews, and 0 outcomes. Briggs is still on duty. His Marines are still getting hurt. And Calloway is still filing things and encouraging people to keep their heads down." She paused. "And then you walked into the mess hall yesterday and in the space of 10 minutes did something I haven't been able to do in 8 months. "What's that?" Maya said. "You made people see it," Keene said. "Actually see it, not read about it in a report. See it happen in front of them." Maya was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about the operative boundary, the line between her cover assignment and the actual mission. She was thinking about what Keene had just disclosed and what it meant and whether it changed anything. "Lieutenant Colonel," she said carefully, "I'm a logistics officer on a 30-day temporary assignment." Keene looked at her for a long moment. "Sure," she said. "And I'm a training operations officer who just happens to run a personal surveillance program on one of my subordinate NCOs." She tilted her head. "We're both exactly what our titles say we are." It wasn't a question. Maya met her eyes. Neither of them said anything else. But something had shifted between them, a quiet mutual acknowledgement of a reality that neither of them could name out loud, and both of them now shared. "Keene," Maya said. "Carter. Don't tell anyone about the footage yet." Keene nodded once. "Wasn't planning to." She walked away. Maya stood where she was for a moment, recalibrating. She had not expected an ally. She was going to have to think very carefully about what to do with one. Briggs's next move was more sophisticated than she'd given him credit for. By second 600 that afternoon, 3 separate Marines from 3 separate units had found reasons to interact with Maya in ways that were calibrated to gather information rather than conduct business. One asked about supply requisition procedures that he definitely already knew. One requested a copy of a document that was available through the standard digital system. One simply sat near her in the common area and started a conversation about base amenities that wandered with decreasing subtlety toward questions about her background. She answered every single one of them honestly. That was part of the discipline. When you were running a cover that was designed to hold under scrutiny, you didn't avoid questions. You answered them completely and accurately within the parameters of the cover, because inconsistency under low-pressure questioning was what unraveled identities, not the big confrontations. The big confrontations you could manage. It was the small casual conversations where people slipped. She never slipped. She told each Marine exactly what her cover story contained in the same words, without elaboration or deflection, and let them carry whatever they gathered back to whoever had sent them. By the time the last one left, she had a clearer picture of what Briggs was actually trying to do. I wasn't trying to intimidate her directly anymore. He'd tried that, and it hadn't worked. Now he was trying to build a dossier fragments of information that he could arrange into a narrative that made her seem like the problem that made yesterday look like provocation rather than response. The thing about that strategy was that it required the person being targeted to behave defensively, to have inconsistencies to exploit, to be hiding something that could be found. Maya wasn't hiding the things he was looking for. The things she was hiding were in an entirely different compartment than anything his informal intelligence network was equipped to access. She let him look. She returned to her room at 1800, wrote her evening notes, and then did something she hadn't done in the 3 previous days of preparation. She made a phone call. Not on her regular phone. On the secure line. It rang twice. "Report," said the voice on the other end. "The target environment is more complex than the initial assessment," she said. "Briggs is the surface problem. The institutional tolerance is the structural problem. I've identified a potential ally in the command structure who has been independently documenting for 8 months without institutional support." "Keene?" She paused. "You knew about Keene." "We knew someone at Keene's level had been flagging Briggs internally. We didn't know she'd been keeping separate surveillance. She has footage." A silence on the other end, longer than the usual processing silence. "How clean?" "Clean enough," Maya said. "The shove is visible. My response is visible. The room's reaction is visible. A defense attorney would challenge the chain of custody, but a command review board wouldn't need to meet that standard. Can Keene's position survive if the footage comes out? Depends on how it comes out," Maya said. "If it comes out as evidence in a formal review that she initiated through proper channels, she's protected. If it comes out as someone leaking to create pressure, she gets burned, and Briggs gets positioned as the victim." "And your assessment of her intent?" Maya thought about Keene's face in the corridor. The particular look of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally found a place to set it down for a moment. "She wants it done right," Maya said. "She's been waiting for the right moment, and I think she's worried the right moment keeps not arriving." "Do you trust her?" Maya considered the question, the way she considered all questions about trust, carefully, without sentiment, with full acknowledgement that trust was a tool that could be used in both directions. "Provisionally," she said. "I trust her intent. I'm still evaluating her judgment." "Keep evaluating." "I always do." The line went quiet for a moment. "Carter." "Sir?" "Briggs filed with JAG this morning. He's alleging assault." The information landed in Maya's chest, like a stone hitting water, the initial impact, and then the ripples. "He's making it formal," she said. "As of 1100 hours. The complaint is officially in the system." She thought about that, about what it meant strategically. Briggs had moved faster than she'd expected, which meant either he was more rattled than he appeared, or someone above him had advised the move. "Who helped him write it?" she said. Another pause. "That's an interesting question." "It's the relevant question," she said. A staff sergeant doesn't file with JAG the same day without someone coaching him on the timing and the language. Someone told him to lock it in before a counter-narrative could be established. We're looking at it. Look faster, she said. If there's a senior officer helping Briggs build a case that changes the shape of what I'm dealing with here. Understood. 25 days, Carter. 24 now, she said. She ended the call and sat in the silence of her room for a long moment. A JAG complaint. That was a move designed to do two things. Create an official record that positioned her as the aggressor and force her into a defensive posture where she'd have to spend energy and attention managing the complaint instead of the investigation. It was smart. Smarter than she'd expected. She needed to know who was behind it. She found the answer at 2100 that evening in a way she hadn't anticipated. Danny Reyes knocked on the door of the visiting officer quarters. She opened it and looked at him. I was in civilian clothes off-duty hours, and he looked like someone who had spent considerable time arguing with himself about whether to come, and had resolved the argument approximately 45 seconds before arriving. Reyes, she said. Ma'am. He looked at the floor, then at her. I need to tell you something. Come in, she said. He came in and stood just inside the door with the posture of someone who hadn't decided yet whether the visit was a mistake. I'm sorry about yesterday, he said. He gestured vaguely. The whole thing. I should have said something before it got as far as it did. You got the mop, she said. That mattered. He looked at her like he wasn't sure she was serious. I got a mop. You did the right thing when everyone around you was doing nothing, she said. That's not a small thing. People underestimate it because it's quiet. Don't underestimate it. He was quiet for a moment. There's something you need to know, he said finally, about the JAG complaint. She waited. Sergeant Major Horton helped Briggs write it, Reyes said. I heard them. I was in the equipment room and they didn't know. Horton told Briggs the exact language to use, how to characterize what happened, how to say you came at him. He said, if Briggs could get the complaint formally filed before end of business, it would... He stopped. It would establish a record, Maya finished. Reyes nodded. He said you'd be too smart to push back hard once you had an open complaint against you. He said, smart people get careful when they're being watched officially. Maya absorbed that. Sergeant Major Horton. She pulled his file up from memory. 18 years. Strong record. Career built on the same institutional framework that Briggs operated within, just higher up in it. The kind of person who would know exactly how to use formal systems to protect informal ones. This wasn't Briggs being reactive. This was the system protecting itself. Which meant it wasn't just a culture problem anymore. It was a coordination problem. And that was a different category of case entirely. Reyes, she said. Ma'am. Why are you telling me this? He looked at her. And for a moment, the 21-year-old who had been passed over for promotion because someone had decided he lacked assertiveness, looked like exactly what he was. A young man who had watched too many things happen that shouldn't have, and had finally decided that staying quiet about one more of them wasn't something he could do. Because it's wrong, he said, and somebody should say so. Maya looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what it cost to say something like that in an environment like this. Not just the professional cost. She understood the professional cost, but the personal cost. The way it felt to sit with the knowledge and the discomfort, and decide that the discomfort of speaking was smaller than the discomfort of not speaking. You know this is going to be harder before it gets easier, she said. Yes, ma'am. And you came anyway? Yes, ma'am. She nodded once. Okay, she said. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to go back to your barracks and you're going to act exactly like this conversation never happened. You're going to treat the next 3 days exactly like the 3 days before yesterday. You understand me? He looked uncertain. But, I'm not dismissing what you told me, she said. I'm protecting what you told me. There's a difference. If you change your behavior, people notice. If people notice, they start asking questions. If they start asking questions, you become visible. And right now, you being invisible is more valuable to the truth than you being visible is. He thought about it. "And you," he said. "I'm going to do my job," she said. He nodded slowly. Then he said, "Are you actually logistics?" The question was direct and sincere, and asked by someone who had been paying enough attention to deserve an honest answer. Maya looked at him. "Go get some sleep, Reyes," she said. He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He left. Maya closed the door and leaned against it in the dark. Sergeant Major Horton. Briggs as the instrument. Horton as the mechanism. And somewhere above that, because there was always somewhere above that, whatever had allowed both of them to operate this way long enough that it had started to feel like the natural order of things. She had 24 days. She had footage she couldn't officially access, yet a witness she needed to protect an ally she was still evaluating, and a formal complaint designed to make her careful. She thought about what Horton had told Briggs. Smart people get careful when they're being watched officially. She opened her secure notebook. She wrote down everything Reyes had told her verbatim with timestamp. Then she wrote one additional line beneath it. Horton is right. Smart people do get careful. She paused. Then she wrote the rest of the sentence. He just doesn't know what kind of careful. She didn't sleep much, not because she was afraid. Fear was an emotion she had long since learned to metabolize into something useful, but because her mind was doing the thing it did when a case shifted shape. Running the new information against the existing map. Testing the edges. Finding the places where the two didn't line up cleanly, and asking herself why. Horton. The more she turned it over, the more it bothered her. Not the fact of him she had expected someone above Briggs to be part of the structure. What bothered her was the timing. Horton had moved within hours of the mess hall incident. Not days. Hours. That kind of speed didn't come from a man who had heard about a problem and decided to address it. That kind of speed came from a man who had been waiting for exactly this kind of situation and already had a response prepared, which meant he'd been monitoring Briggs, watching for a flashpoint, ready to shape the narrative the moment one occurred, which meant Horton wasn't protecting Briggs. Horton was protecting something Briggs had access to. She wrote that down at 0300, underlined it twice, and then made herself stop and lie down, because running on no sleep made her edges soft, and she couldn't afford soft edges. She was up at 0445. By 0600 she was in the logistics office, the only person there with a cup of bad coffee and access to the base's supply requisition records for the past 14 months. That access was legitimate. It was literally her cover assignment. Nobody had thought to restrict what a logistics officer could see in logistics records, which was the kind of institutional blind spot that Maya had learned to treat like a gift. She started reading, not looking for anything specific yet, just reading, letting the data establish its own baseline so that anomalies would surface naturally rather than being forced through a predetermined filter. It was slower this way, but it was cleaner, and clean was what held up when things got difficult. She had been reading for 40 minutes when Sergeant First Class Ruiz came in. Ruiz stopped when she saw Maya, then moved to her own desk without comment. She set up her workstation. She poured coffee. She did 3 things that had nothing to do with Maya before she finally looked up. "You're in early," she said. "Couldn't sleep," Maya said. Honest. "First week on a new base is always like that." Ruiz paused. "Or the week after you've been shoved in the mess hall." "Both," Maya said. Ruiz was quiet for a moment. Then, "Horton's going to come for you today." Maya kept her eyes on the screen. "I know. You don't seem worried about that." "I'm not unworried about it," Maya said carefully. "I'm choosing to use the energy somewhere it can do more work." Ruiz looked at her for a long time. 3 years I've been here," she said. "I've watched 6 different people try to push back against the way things run. 2 transferred out voluntarily. 3 transferred out involuntarily. 1 filed a formal complaint that got nowhere and then quietly put in for early separation." "I know," Maya said. "I read the incident logs." Ruiz blinked. "You read the incident logs. The last 14 months of supply requisition records are public access for anyone in this office," Maya said. The incident reports that came through the logistics division as part of medical supply requests are attached to those records. It's all in the same system. She looked up at Ruiz. 6 incidents. 3 involving Briggs directly. 1 involving a corporal in a unit Horton supervises. All closed without formal action. Ruiz stared at her. "You read all of that this morning," she said. "I'm a fast reader." Carter. Ruiz set down her coffee. "Who are you?" It was the second time in 2 days someone had asked her that question, and meant something larger than her name and rank. Maya looked at her steadily. "I'm the person who's reading the incident logs," she said. "Right now, that's enough." Ruiz sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. "God," she said softly. Not to Maya. To some private calculation she was running. "You're not logistics." Maya said nothing, which was in its own way an answer. Ruiz brought her eyes back down. Something in her face had settled, not relief exactly, but the particular quality of a person who had been carrying a weight alone for a long time and had just felt someone else's hand on the other side of it. "What do you need?" she said. "Right now," Maya said. "I need you to act exactly like you would on a normal Thursday. Can you do that?" "I've been doing that for 3 years," Ruiz said. "I'm excellent at it." "Good," Maya said. "Because today is going to be important, and I need the room to be quiet around it." Horton arrived at 0930. She heard him before she saw him, the particular sound of a senior NCO who had spent enough years in command positions that his physical presence generated a kind of acoustic announcement. Doors that were open got wider. Conversations that were happening got quieter. The air in a room changed slightly, the way it changed before a weather shift, the pressure dropping just enough to notice if you were paying attention. Maya was always paying attention. She did not look up when he entered the logistics office. She heard him cross the room, heard him stop at the edge of her workspace, heard the deliberate pause of a man who expected to be acknowledged. She finished the line she was reading. Then she looked up. Sergeant Major Marcus Horton was 51 years old, built like a man who had spent 30 years believing the body was an argument you had to keep winning, with gray at his temples, and the kind of eyes that had been deciding things about people for so long, the habit had become indistinguishable from his actual personality. He was in full uniform, which on a Thursday morning in a logistics office was a small but deliberate signal. He was making this official. "Carter," he said. "Sergeant Major," she said. He pulled a chair without being invited and sat down across from her desk. The chair was not on her side of the workspace. He had positioned himself at a 45-degree angle, close enough to dominate the space, far enough to claim he wasn't crowding. She noted the tactic. "You've had a difficult couple of days," he said. "I've had an interesting couple of days," she said. "I wouldn't call it difficult." "The JAG complaint is noted," she said. "I've been advised and I'm cooperating with the process." "Good." He nodded slowly. "Because the thing about JAG processes is they can get complicated very quickly when the initial facts are contested. Witnesses remember things differently. Accounts shift." He paused. "It becomes very messy, very time-consuming, for everyone involved." He said it pleasantly. He said it like a man describing a weather pattern he had no particular stake in. Maya recognized it as a threat delivered with full deniability. "I imagine it does," she said. "Fortunately, I have a very clear memory." "Everyone thinks they do," Horton said. "The human brain is a complicated instrument. Under stress, under social pressure, under the weight of competing narratives." He spread his hands slightly. "Things get murky." "Mine don't." He looked at her. The pleasant expression didn't change. But something behind his eyes did a small recalibrating movement, like a man who had walked into a room expecting it to be furnished a certain way and found the furniture arranged differently. "You're confident," he said. "I'm accurate," she said. "Those aren't always the same thing. In this case, they are." Horton leaned forward slightly. "Carter, I'm going to be honest with you because I think honesty serves us both better than the alternative at this point." "Please," she said. "You've been here 4 days. You don't understand the culture of this command. You don't understand the relationships or the history or the particular dynamics that make this base function the way it does. He kept his voice reasonable, paternal almost. What looked like an altercation to you was in context a very normal interaction between a senior NCO and a temporary attached officer who hadn't yet learned how things work here. Maya looked at him. He shoved me hard enough to knock my tray across 3 tables, she said, in front of 200 people. He reacted poorly to what he perceived as Sergeant Major. Her voice didn't rise, it dropped. I want to be careful about the next 60 seconds of this conversation, because I think they're going to matter. You came here to encourage me to characterize what happened differently than it happened. I understand why you came, and I understand what you're trying to protect. But I need you to understand that I am not going to do that, and the reason I am not going to do that has nothing to do with stubbornness and everything to do with the fact that what I saw and what I experienced is what happened, and no amount of institutional pressure changes that. Horton stared at her. The pleasant expression was still there, but it had gone thin at the edges. You're making things harder for yourself, he said. That may be true, she said. I've found that doing the right thing has a way of being harder in the short term. He stood. He straightened his uniform. He looked at her with the kind of look that senior men in institutional power structures gave people when they had decided someone was going to learn a lesson and were already decided on the teaching method. You've got 26 days left on your rotation, he said. 24, she said. He paused. 24 then. A small smile. I hope they're productive ones. He left. Ruiz, who had been completely motionless at her desk throughout the entire exchange, let out a very controlled breath. He's going to make your life difficult, she said quietly. He's going to try, Maya said. She turned back to her screen. What's the name of the corporal in Horton's supervised unit? The one with the closed incident from 7 months ago. Ruiz stared at her. You're going back to the records. I never left, Maya said. The name Ruiz. A pause. Mendez, Ruiz said. Corporal Felix Mendez. He's still here. He requested a transfer twice and both times his paperwork disappeared before it cleared the desk. Disappeared, Maya said. Administratively misfiled, Ruiz said carefully. Twice. Maya looked at her. Where is Mendez assigned? Motor pool, Ruiz said. He's been there since the incident. Motor pool was where you put people you wanted to sideline without the paperwork of formal disciplinary action. It was the institutional equivalent of a corner visible occupied going nowhere. I need to talk to him, Maya said. He won't talk to you, Ruiz said immediately. He's been here 7 months since the incident, and he hasn't talked to anyone. Whatever happened scared him into permanent quiet. Scared people talk, Maya said. They just need to believe it's safe. And you're going to convince him of that in 24 days, Ruiz said. It wasn't quite sarcasm. It was the tone of someone who wanted to believe something and couldn't get the math to work. I'm going to try, Maya said. She found Mendez at 12:45, which was his lunch break, which he spent according to the pattern Ruiz had quietly described alone at the far end of the outdoor seating area that backed up against the motor pool fence. Not inside, not in the mess hall. Outside where he could see who was coming from 3 directions. She recognized the positioning instinctively. She took her own tray and sat 2 tables away. Not next to him, not directly across. 2 tables away at an angle where they could speak if he chose, but where his back was covered by the fence and he could watch the approach. She ate her lunch. He ate his lunch. For 6 minutes, neither of them said anything. Then Mendez said without looking up, "People don't usually sit out here." "I like the angle," Maya said. A pause. "You're the logistics officer," he said. "From the mess hall." "Yes." Another pause, longer. "What do you want?" he said. His voice was flat, not hostile, just the voice of someone who had learned that questions preceded demands and was skipping the performance of not knowing that. "Nothing right now," she said. "I'm eating lunch." "Don't do that," he said. "Don't do the thing where you pretend this is accidental." She looked at him directly. He was 24, maybe 25. He had the particular hollowness around the eyes of someone who had been carrying something heavy for long enough that it had stopped being a temporary weight and started being part of the structure of his face. "All right," she said. "It's not accidental. I read your incident report. What I read in it and what I read between it don't match." He was very still. "I'm not here to make you do anything," she said. "I'm not here to pressure you or promise you things I can't deliver. I'm here because I think something happened to you that shouldn't have, and I think the people responsible for making sure it didn't happen again made sure it stayed quiet instead, and I think you've been sitting in the motor pool for 7 months watching that feel like the end of the story." Mendez didn't move. "It's not the end," she said. He looked up. His eyes were the eyes of someone who had heard things like this before and had learned to wait for the part where it turned into something that cost him rather than helped him. "Who are you?" he said. It was the third time in 48 hours someone had asked her that question in that tone. "Someone who's reading the records," she said, "and someone who has a very good memory for what she reads." "That's not an answer." "No," she said. "It's not, but it's what I can give you right now, and I need you to decide whether that's enough to have the next part of this conversation." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his tray. Then he looked back at her. "Horton was there," he said, "when it happened. He wasn't the one who did it, but he was there, and he saw it, and he told me afterward that if I filed a formal complaint, my transfer paperwork would never clear." He said it quietly. "Just facts. The way you described something you had processed past the point of emotion and into the flat territory beyond." "He said that directly," Maya said. "He said it the way people say things when they want you to know what they mean, without them having to mean it officially," Mendez said. Maya nodded. She understood exactly what he meant. "Okay," she said. "Mendez, I need you to do something for me." "I'm not testifying," he said immediately. Reflex. The word was out before the thought was finished. "Not yet," she said. He blinked. "What does not yet mean?" "It means I'm not asking you to do anything today except keep eating your lunch," she said. "And maybe tomorrow keep eating your lunch out here, and maybe the day after that as well." He stared at her. "That's it." "That's it for now," she said. "I need you to trust me on the timing." "I don't know you," he said. "I know," she said. "But you just told me something true, and I didn't flinch, and nobody above your pay grade has done that for 7 months. So..." She picked up her tray. "Maybe that's a start." She stood. She was 2 steps away when he said, "There's a file." She stopped. Didn't turn immediately. Controlled the impulse. She turned. "Horton keeps a file," Mendez said. His voice was lower now, eyes down. "On everyone he's dealing with, not officially. Personal records. I saw it once when I was in his office waiting for the transfer paperwork the first time." He paused. "He had my name on one of the tabs. He had 3 other names too." "Do you remember the other names?" Maya said. He nodded slowly. He told her. 2 of them she recognized from the incident logs. The third one stopped her cold, because the third name was Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Keene. She processed that information for exactly the time it took her to walk back to the logistics office, which was 4 minutes, which was not enough time. Horton had a file on Keene. That could mean several things, and she ran through all of them quickly, the way her training had taught her to run through multiple scenarios simultaneously without committing to any of them until the evidence forced the issue. It could mean Horton saw Keene as a threat and had been building a counterfile the same way Keene had been building a case against him. That was the most straightforward reading. It could mean Keene's 8 months of internal complaints had made her visible enough to Horton that he was preparing to preemptively undermine her credibility. Or it could mean something she didn't want to think about yet, but had to, that Keene was in Horton's file not as a threat, but as a participant. That the 8 months of internal complaints had been a performance designed to establish a paper trail that looked like resistance while actually controlling the pace and direction of any investigation that might arise. She hated that she had to consider it. She considered it anyway. Because the thing about trusting people provisionally was that provisional meant something. It meant you kept the door open on both sides until the evidence walked through one of them. She was going to need to test Keen. Not confront her. Test her. There was a difference, and the difference was whether Keen would see it coming. The base-wide physical training formation happened every Thursday at 1500, which was mandatory for all attached personnel, regardless of duty assignment. Maya was there in her PT uniform in the back of the formation assigned to the temporary personnel section. Briggs was there too. She hadn't expected him to be. She'd assumed the JAG complaint would have generated at least temporary administrative separation from formation. But there he was at the front of his unit, running his Marines through warm-ups with the aggressive normalcy of a man who had decided the best defense was the appearance of no defense. He looked at her once. She looked back. Neither of them said anything, but the 20 Marines between them who caught the exchange definitely noticed and definitely carried whatever they read in it back to their own private calculations about what was happening and who was winning. Formation ran for 40 minutes. The base commander, Colonel Richard Page, 62 years old. 3 combat tours. A man she had assessed in her file review as genuinely well-intentioned, but increasingly dependent on his senior NCOs for the operational picture because the base's complexity had exceeded what he was willing to micromanage, ran the Thursday formation personally. Which meant she got her first extended look at him in a context where he was operational rather than ceremonial. What she saw disturbed her. Not because he was incompetent. He wasn't. He ran a clean formation, communicated well, moved through the ranks during the cool-down period, and addressed individuals by name, with the practiced ease of a man who understood that personal recognition mattered. What disturbed her was the moment when Page passed Briggs. They exchanged a look. Brief. Professional on the surface. But Maya, who spent years reading people in confined, high-stakes environments, caught something in Page's expression that she hadn't expected. Not disapproval. Not distance. Something that looked from a precise angle like reassurance. Like a man who was aware a situation existed and was communicating in the compressed language of 2 people who understood each other well that he was not going to be a problem. She filed that. She filed it in the part of her mental record labeled high priority and let the full weight of it sit there pressing down on everything beneath. If Page knew, and Page was indicating support, then the system protecting itself wasn't a middle management problem. It went up. It went all the way up. And that changed everything about how she was going to have to handle the next 23 days. At 17:30, she requested a private meeting with Keen. She used the official calendar system. Formal request. Full visibility to anyone who cared to look. She put the subject as Training Coordination Overlap Logistics Interface, which was exactly the kind of administrative nothing that nobody would think twice about. Keen confirmed within 12 minutes. They met in Keen's office at 18:15. Keen closed the door. The office was small and tidy in the way of someone who used tidiness as a professional signal rather than a personal preference. Maya sat down. She said, "Horton has a file on you." Keen didn't react the way Maya expected. She didn't look alarmed. She didn't go still in the way of someone being caught. She just closed her eyes briefly a single second and then opened them. "I know," she said. Maya looked at her. "I've known for about 4 months," Keen said. "Someone in his office saw it and told me." "And you didn't tell anyone?" "Who would I tell?" Keen said. "Calloway Page." She said the name of the base commander with a flatness that told Maya everything she needed to know about Keen's assessment of that option. "You think Page is aware," Maya said. Not a question. Keen looked at her for a long, steady moment. "I think Page has chosen not to know things that would require him to act," she said carefully. "Which is a kind of aware." Maya absorbed that. Then she said, "The footage you have, the maintenance camera." "Yes. If I told you the timing needed to change, that it needed to go through a channel that isn't you and isn't internal to this base, would you give it up?" Keen stared at her. "Give it up," she said slowly. "To who?" "To a process you won't have full visibility into," Maya said. "To people who will use it in a way you can't control once it leaves your hands. and possibly in a way that means your name appears as a source in a formal proceeding that this command will not be happy about." The silence that followed was full. Keen's expression moved through several things. Maya watched them pass: fear, calculation, doubt, something that looked like grief for a version of the situation where things resolved more cleanly. And then something else, something that settled. "Yes," Keen said, just the one word. No hesitation once it arrived. Maya looked at her. "Why?" she said. Keen looked at the wall of her small, tidy office, at the commendations and service photographs that lined it, at a career's worth of the right kind of ambition organized into frames. "Because Corporal Mendez has been eating lunch alone by a chain-link fence for 7 months, she said quietly. "And I'm the senior officer on this base who knew the closest thing to the truth of why, and I let 8 months pass trying to do it the careful way." She looked at Maya. "There is no careful way. I know that now. There's just whether you do it or you don't." Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I need the footage by tomorrow morning." Keen nodded. "And Keen?" "Yes. I need you to stay completely calm and completely normal for the next 23 days, regardless of what you hear or see," Maya said. "Can you do that?" Keen almost smiled. It had a tired quality to it. "I've been doing that for 3 years, she said. "I'm very good at it." "Good," Maya said. She stood. She was at the door when Keen said, "Carter." She turned. "The Silver Star," Keen said. "What was it for?" Maya looked at her. "I'll tell you when this is over," she said. She walked out into the corridor. Behind her, she heard Keen exhale the sound of someone who had just stepped off a ledge they'd been standing at the edge of for a very long time and found to their own surprise that there was ground beneath it. Maya walked back toward the visiting quarters through the cooling evening air. She had the footage coming. She had Mendez's testimony about the verbal threat. She had the supply records and the incident logs. She had the look that had passed between Page and Briggs during formation. She had a case that was growing stronger and wider and more dangerous by the hour, reaching into levels of command that changed what it was and what it would take to resolve it. She had 23 days. And she had one more thing she hadn't had 48 hours ago. She had people who were ready to tell the truth. That, in her experience, was when cases either broke clean or broke badly. She was going to do everything in her power to make sure it was clean. And if it wasn't clean, if the system pushed back hard enough and fast enough that clean became impossible, then she had a set of contingencies that nobody on Naval Base Redstone had any idea existed. She was prepared for both. She had always been prepared for both. That was the job. The footage arrived at 0412. A standard-looking encrypted file transfer routed through a channel that would appear to anyone who examined it to be a routine logistics data sync. Keen had done it cleanly. Maya had expected nothing less, but she felt something settle in her chest anyway when the confirmation ping came through, the particular relief of a person who has trusted someone and been right about it. She opened the file, watched it once straight through without stopping. Then she watched it again. The camera angle was not perfect. It caught the mess hall at a slight diagonal, the kind of coverage that a surveillance system designer would have considered suboptimal, but it captured everything that mattered. The shove was unambiguous. The physics of it were unambiguous. Maya not falling was unambiguous. And Briggs's face, caught in profile for 2 full seconds after her arm came free of his grip, showed something that no amount of institutional language was going to be able to reframe into a reasonable response to a perceived slight. He had looked afraid. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Afraid. The face of a man who had spent years relying on physical intimidation as his primary operational tool, and had just encountered something that didn't respond to it, and had no second tool ready. She watched that 2 seconds of footage 4 times. Then she closed the file, secured it to 3 separate encrypted storage locations with 3 different access protocols, and sat in the dark for a while thinking about Colonel Page. The look during formation had not left her. She had turned it over during the few hours of sleep she'd managed, and it had still been there when she woke up, that brief quiet signal of reassurance between the commanding officer and the man his sergeant major was protecting. It could still be innocent. She knew that. She was trained not to let single data points do the structural work of patterns. But it sat uneasily beside everything else she'd assembled, and the discomfort of it was the kind she'd learned to take seriously. At 0600, she made the secure call. "I have the footage," she said. "Clean, completely. The shove is unambiguous. I have Mendez's verbal account of Horton's direct threat to his transfer paperwork. I have 14 months of supply records, with 3 anomalies that connect to incident closures. And I have a behavioral observation from Thursday's formation that I need someone to cross-reference against Page's communication logs for the past 6 months." Silence on the other end. "You're looking at Page," the voice said. "I'm not looking at him yet," she said. "I'm asking someone who has access to things I don't to look at him while I continue doing what I'm doing. Carter, if Page is involved, this isn't a command culture problem anymore." "I know what it is," she said. "Can you get me the cross-reference?" A pause, longer than usual. "Give me 48 hours. "You've got 24, she said. "Things are moving faster than the original timeline." "Why?" "Because Horton is smart enough to know he didn't close the conversation in my office yesterday," she said. "And smart people who feel a situation slipping start making moves. I want to be ahead of the next one, not reacting to it." The line was quiet for 3 seconds. 24 hours, the voice confirmed. She ended the call. Then she opened her notebook and wrote 3 words at the top of a fresh page. How far up? That was the question now. That was the only question. Not whether there was a problem, the evidence for the problem was documented and secured. Not whether Briggs and Horton were culpable, that case was already strong enough to act on. The question was whether the accountability ended there at the NCO level, or whether it ran up through Calloway's careful blindness and Page's quiet reassurances into something that would require a different kind of response entirely. She wrote the question, and then she closed the notebook and went to the logistics office and did her job. Because the hardest discipline she had ever learned was the discipline of doing ordinary things while extraordinary ones were in motion. Ruiz was waiting for her. Not in the obvious way, not standing at the door or watching the entrance. Just present already at her desk at 0630, with 2 cups of coffee and the particular body language of someone who has made a decision overnight and is waiting for the right moment to announce it. Maya took the coffee without comment. "I want to help," Ruiz said. "You are helping," Maya said. "More than that." Ruiz turned in her chair to face Maya directly. 3 years I've been here. 3 years I've been the person who knows things and files them correctly and stays in my lane, because staying in my lane is what kept me functional in this environment." She paused. "I'm tired of my lane." Maya looked at her carefully. "Ruiz, I need you to understand what helping actually means in this context. It's not dramatic. It's not confrontational. It might not even be visible for weeks. I understand that. It means doing exactly what I tell you when I tell you without improvising. It means not telling anyone, including people you trust, what you know or what you're doing. It means absorbing whatever pressure comes in the next few weeks without reacting to it in ways that signal you're part of something." "Carter," Ruiz said quietly, "I've been absorbing pressure in this office for 3 years without anyone knowing. I'm not a beginner. The force of it was simple and real and landed exactly as intended." Maya studied her for a moment. "The 14-month supply records," she said. "The 3 anomalies I flagged this morning." "I know which 3, Ruiz said. "You've seen them." "I flagged them internally 11 months ago," Ruiz said. "Through Calloway. They were recategorized as clerical errors within a week, and the flag was closed." Maya stared at her. "You flagged them 11 months ago," she said. "Yes. That's not in any of the public records I accessed." "No," Ruiz said. "It wouldn't be. Calloway's office handles the recategorizations. The original flags disappear into the administrative revision process, and what's left looks like a correction, not a suppression." Maya was quiet for a moment, reorganizing the architecture of what she knew. Ruiz hadn't just been a bystander for 3 years. Ruiz had been trying through legitimate channels to do exactly what Maya was doing and had been outmaneuvered at every turn by a system specifically designed to absorb and neutralize internal challenges. "Do you have copies," Maya said, "of the original flags?" "I keep copies of everything I submit," Ruiz said. "Off-system, personal records. I started doing it after the first recategorization." "That's 11 months of parallel documentation," Maya said. 12, actually. Ruiz held her eyes. "I started before the first flag. I started the week Mendez ended up in the motor pool." The coffee was getting cold. Neither of them reached for it. "Ruiz," Maya said, "I need those records." "I know," Ruiz said. "I'll have them to you by end of day." She turned back to her desk. Then she stopped. "Carter," she said without turning around. "Whatever you actually are, whatever you're actually here to do." She paused. "Thank you for finally being here." Maya didn't answer, because there was nothing to say that was adequate to 3 years of a woman doing the right thing inside a system designed to make doing the right thing feel pointless. She turned to her own screen and kept working. Briggs found her at 1100. Not in the logistics office. In the corridor outside the training coordination building, where she had been meeting with a supply officer about equipment transfer schedules. She came out of the meeting, and he was there leaning against the wall with the particular quality of someone who had been waiting long enough to make the waiting itself a statement. He was alone. That was the first thing she noticed. No junior Marines, no audience, no performance scaffolding, just Briggs. She stopped in front of him and waited. "I know you think you've got something," he said. His voice was different from the mess hall. Still controlled, still projecting certainty, but with something underneath it that hadn't been there 2 days ago. A vibration. The sound of a structure that had been stable for a long time, beginning to recognize that the ground beneath it had changed. "I'm doing my job," she said. "Your job." He almost laughed. "Right." She waited. "You don't understand what you're walking into," he said. "You came here for 30 days, and you think you can read a place in 30 days. You can't. You don't know the history. You don't know why things are the way they are. You don't know what it costs to keep a unit functional when you're working with resources and personnel and command structures that—" He stopped. "Reorganized. The things that look wrong from the outside look wrong because you're seeing them out of context." "The shove had full context," she said. "I was there." "That was a mistake," he said. "I know it was a mistake. I reacted badly to a situation I misread." He met her eyes. "I'm not going to say that officially because of how it would land in the complaint process, but I'm saying it to you now." It was the most honest thing he had said in any interaction they'd had. She recognized that. She also recognized that it was not a full accounting, and that the most dangerous kind of partial honesty was the kind that was genuine enough to generate sympathy without requiring the person to give up the thing they were actually protecting. "Briggs," she said. "What are you protecting?" He blinked. "What?" "Not you," she said. "You're not the thing you're protecting. The shove was instinct. The JAG complaint was instruction. Someone told you to file, and told you the language, and told you the timing. You're protecting whatever Horton told you to protect when he coached you through that filing." She watched his face. "What is it?" His expression shifted through 3 things in rapid succession: surprise, denial, and then something that was almost the beginning of a different kind of conversation. And then it closed. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Okay," she said. She moved to walk past him. "Carter." She stopped. "Whatever you think you know," he said. "Be careful with it, not because of me, because of what happens to the people around you when institutional weight lands on a situation. It doesn't just land on the target, it spreads." She turned, looked at him. "Is that a threat?" she said. "It's a description," he said, "of how things work." She studied him for a long moment. The vibration was still there. Under the controlled surface something was moving that he wasn't fully in command of, and she thought she understood what it was. He was scared. Not of her. Not of the footage or the files or the JAG process. I was scared of what Horton might do if the situation deteriorated past the point where Horton could contain it. Because men like Briggs understood on a level below conscious analysis that the people who used them as instruments were only loyal to the instrument while it was functional, and the moment it became a liability. "Briggs," she said, "if there's something you want to tell me, I can make sure it's heard in the right place." A long silence. "There's nothing to tell," he said. He walked away. Maya watched him go. There was something to tell. She was certain of it. The question was whether he'd find the courage to tell it before the situation moved past the point where his account added new information rather than just confirmed what she already had. She gave it 40% odds. She would take whatever she could get. The 48 hours she'd asked for turned into 18. At 13:40, her secure phone vibrated with the message that contained 3 lines of text and changed the shape of everything. Page. 6 months of weekly calls to NavBase Legal. Topic coded as personnel management. Cross-reference to 3 of the same complaint closures you flagged. Not coordination foreknowledge. He knew before they were filed. She read it twice. Then she sat down. Not because she was surprised she had been carrying the possibility since Thursday's formation, but there was something different between carrying a possibility and having it confirmed, and the something different lived in the part of her chest where 18 years of service had deposited whatever was left of her capacity for institutional faith. Paige had known. Not Paige looking away from things he didn't want to see. Paige actively informed. 6 months of weekly legal consultations, time to complaint closures, constituting a pattern of foreknowledge that was going to be very difficult for any review board to characterize as coincidental. The commanding officer of Naval Base Redstone had not just failed to stop what was happening, he had been helping to manage it. She put the phone in her pocket. She went back to the logistics office. She sat at her desk. And for 5 minutes, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she'd confirmed, because she had learned a long time ago that the worst thing you could do with difficult information was deny yourself the emotional reality of it. Suppressed it became a toxin. Acknowledged it became fuel. She let it be real. A commanding officer. A sergeant major. A senior NCO. A system of paperwork suppression and administrative misfiling and JIG complaint timing. All working together, not through formal conspiracy, but through the far more common and far more durable mechanism of aligned self-interest and shared preference for the current order. 6 people she could now name had been maneuvered into the motor pool, or transferred out, or separated, or simply exhausted into silence. 23 more were still serving under a man who used fear as a leadership tool, supervised by a command structure that had decided fear was an acceptable cost. She felt it, all of it. Then she opened her notebook, and she went back to work. At 7600 she found Gunnery Sergeant Harold Odom. She had been thinking about him since Part 1, since the mess hall, since she had felt that particular quality of stillness in the corner of the room, and identified it for what it was. She had pulled his file the previous evening. 22 years. 3 combat deployments. A record so consistent and clean that it looked from the outside like a man who had never once done anything remarkable. Until you understood that in an environment like Redstone, doing nothing wrong for 22 years required a level of moral discipline that was in its own way extraordinary. I was in the NCO lounge. Alone as he apparently often was, with coffee and a tablet reading something she couldn't see. She sat down across from him without asking. He looked up. "Carter," he said. She didn't ask how he knew her name. Of course he knew her name. "Odom," she said. "You were watching me in the mess hall." "I watch everyone in the mess hall," he said. "That's different from watching you specifically. You flagged me before Briggs spoke." He looked at her steadily. "You position yourself like someone who has survived things." "Yes," she said. "That's not a logistics officer habit," he said. "No," she said. They looked at each other. The conversation had arrived in the space of 4 exchanges at the thing both of them actually meant. "What do you need?" he said. "I need to know what you've seen," she said. "Not what you've reported, what you've seen. Everything. going back as far as it goes. Odom was quiet for a long time. He looked at his coffee. He looked at the tablet. He looked at something in the middle distance that was probably a memory she wasn't in. "I've been here 6 years," he said. "I know. In 6 years, I have watched this command become something it wasn't when I arrived," he said. Slowly. The way things change slowly when nobody draws a line and says this is where it stops. "When did it start changing?" she said. "When Horton arrived," he said. 4 years ago. He came in under Page's direct sponsorship. They'd served together previously, and within 8 months, the reporting culture had shifted." He paused. "Not dramatically, subtly. The way a current shifts when something changes far upstream." "You documented it," she said. "I'm a gunnery sergeant with 22 years, he said. "I document everything I witness. It is the single most valuable professional habit I have ever developed." He looked at her. "Whether anyone reads the documentation is a separate question." "I'll read it," she said. He studied her for a moment. "Carter," he said, "how many people on this base do you think know approximately what you are?" She thought about it honestly. 3, maybe 4. "I'll tell you something," he said. "In 22 years of service, I have met exactly 4 people who moved the way you moved when Briggs grabbed your arm. 2 of them were instructors at specialized warfare training programs. One of them was a man I served with for 11 months in a place I don't say the name of in public. And one of them was the person who saved 9 lives in a situation that I read a classified report about 3 years later and still wasn't sure I fully understood." He paused. "All 4 of them had one thing in common." "What?" she said. "They were never in the room to prove anything to anyone," he said. "They were always in the room for a reason that had nothing to do with themselves." Maya was quiet for a moment. "The documentation," she said. "Can you get it to me?" "I've had it ready for 14 months, he said. "I was waiting for someone worth giving it to." Something moved in her chest. Not sentimentality. The specific emotion she had learned to recognize in herself when an investigation arrived at its center of gravity, when the weight of evidence organized itself around the truth, and the truth became finally visible in its full shape. "Odom," she said. 23 days is what I have." "I know," he said. He picked up his tablet, opened a file, turned it to face her. "I can shorten that." She went back to her room at 2000, carrying everything Odom had given her, everything Ruiz had delivered, and the footage that Keene had transferred that morning, and she laid it out across the available workspace and looked at it the way she looked at every assembled case, not for what it said, but for the shape it made when all of it was present simultaneously. The shape it made was damning, not in the dramatic, obvious way of evidence that had been manufactured to tell a story. In the quieter, more devastating way of evidence that had been gathered from multiple independent sources over multiple years and had never needed to coordinate because it was all describing the same reality from different angles. She began writing the formal assessment at 2030. Not for the base, not for Calloway or Page, or the JAG office that currently held Briggs's complaint, for the people who had sent her. It took 2 hours and 40 minutes, and when she finished, it was the most complete institutional failure report she had written in 5 years of doing this work, and she had written 11 of them, and none of the others had reached this far up a command structure before the evidence ran out. This one didn't run out. She sent it at 23:10. At 23:14 her phone vibrated. Received. Response protocol initiating. Stand by for authorization window. She set the phone down. Outside the base was quiet. Guard rotation. Generator hum. The sound of a military installation at night being exactly what it was, a place where people slept and were responsible for things, and tried to carry that responsibility with varying degrees of success. She thought about Reyes with the mop. She thought about Mendez eating lunch alone by a fence for 7 months. She thought about Ruiz flagging anomalies for 11 months and watching them disappear. She thought about Odom sitting in the NCO lounge for 6 years, with 22 years of professional discipline and 14 months of ready documentation and nobody worth giving it to. And she thought about what it said about a system. Not this system specifically, but any system. When the people inside it, who were doing the right thing, were doing it in isolation. When the Reyeses and the Ruizes and the Odoms were each carrying their piece of the truth in separate compartments, never connecting, never coordinating, never knowing that 3 feet away, someone else was holding another piece of the same puzzle. That was how systems like this survived, not through strength, through the isolation of the people who wanted to challenge them. She had spent the last 4 days doing something very simple. She had been the person who walked between the compartments and said quietly, "I know what you're carrying. You're not alone in it." The response to the formal assessment came in at 0047. She read it once. Then she set the phone face down on the desk and pressed her palms flat on either side of it and breathed. The authorization was approved, which meant tomorrow was not going to look like anything that had happened yet, which meant the next phase was beginning, which meant that Staff Sergeant Colton Briggs and Sergeant Major Marcus Horton and Major Dennis Calloway and Colonel Richard Page and whoever else the cross-referencing revealed were about to discover that what they had been doing for the past 4 years had been witnessed, documented, corroborated, and delivered to people who had both the authority and the intent to do something about it. She thought about Horton's words in her office. Smart people get careful when they're being watched officially. She thought about what she had written beneath that in her notebook. He just doesn't know what kind of careful. She understood now, sitting in the dark at midnight with an authorization code and 22 days left on a temporary assignment, exactly what kind of careful she had been. The kind that didn't announce itself. The kind that didn't need to. The kind that had spent 4 days in a logistics office on a mid-sized naval base reading supply records and eating lunch near a chain-link fence and watching a formation and drinking bad coffee with a woman who had been trying to tell the truth for 3 years and had quietly assembled everything that needed to be assembled before the people who ran this place knew it was being assembled at all. She closed her notebook. She turned off the light. She lay down in the dark and listened to the base breathe around her. And for the first time in 4 days, she felt something that was not urgency and not calculation. She felt ready. The authorization window opened at 0600. Maya was already dressed, already caffeinated, already at her desk when the second message came through on the secure line, not from her regular contact, but from a level above him, which told her everything she needed to know about how seriously the formal assessment had been received. The message contained 4 items: a case number, a review panel designation, a timeline, and a single instruction that she read 3 times to make sure she understood its full scope. Full disclosure authorized. Identity reveal at your operational discretion. Proceed. She set the phone down. Full disclosure. In 5 years of this work, across 11 assignments and 11 institutional failure reports, she had never received full disclosure authorization. Every previous case had concluded with the evidence passed upward and the identity maintained. Maya, quietly transferring out while the review process ran its course without her visible presence in it. That was the standard methodology. Clean separation. No contamination of the institutional process by the investigators' continued presence. This one was different. They wanted her visible. They wanted the people at Redstone to know who had been watching and what had been assembled, and how completely they had misjudged the quiet woman carrying a plain tray in the mess hall. She understood why. A case that reached a commanding officer required a different kind of accountability architecture than one that stopped at the NCO level. It required something that a paper report couldn't fully deliver: the human reality of a person standing in front of an institution and saying in plain language what had happened and what it meant and what it was going to cost. She was that person. She had always been that person. She just hadn't been authorized to be visible as that person until now. She picked up the phone and sent 3 messages. 1 to Keen today. Be ready. 1 to Ruiz, bring everything. Office. 0800. 1 to Odom, time to be useful. She sent no message to Reyes or Mendez. They had done enough. Whatever happened today, they were going to be protected from the blast radius of it, not positioned inside it. That was non-negotiable. Ruiz arrived at 0755 with a locked personal drive and the expression of someone who had made peace with a decision in the night and arrived on the other side of it, resolved. She set the drive on Maya's desk without a word. Maya looked at it. 12 months of parallel documentation. Every anomaly Ruiz had flagged. Every administrative recategorization. Every complaint that had disappeared into Calloway's office and emerged as a clerical correction. Is it all there? Maya said. Every single file, Ruiz said, time-stamped unaltered with the original submission receipts. Ruiz. Maya looked at her. After today, things on this base are going to change significantly. The process is going to be uncomfortable and public, and there will be people who decide you're responsible for the discomfort because you cooperated. Are you prepared for that? Ruiz sat down in her chair, straightened her uniform, put both hands flat on her desk. Carter, she said, I have been uncomfortable for 3 years while things stayed exactly the same. I think I can manage being uncomfortable while they change. Maya nodded. One more thing, Ruiz said. Before whatever happens today happens. She paused. Mendez. He's been in the motor pool for 7 months because 2 transfer requests disappeared before they cleared. After today, can that be fixed? Yes, Maya said. And Reyes. He was passed over for promotion because someone decided he lacked assertiveness. That evaluation will be reviewed, Maya said. I'll make sure of it. Ruiz was quiet for a moment. Something moved in her expression, not relief exactly. More like the specific exhaustion of a person who has been holding their breath for a very long time and has just been told they can stop. Okay, she said. Let's do this. Keene arrived at the logistics office at 0815, with the camera footage already formatted and packaged on a certified evidence drive with a full chain of custody documentation that she had apparently spent the early hours of the morning preparing. Maya looked at the documentation. You've done this before, she said. I went to law school before the Navy, Keene said. 2 years. Decided it wasn't for me. A pause. Turns out some of it stuck. She handed the drive to Maya with both hands. A deliberate gesture. The kind of handoff that meant more than the physical transfer. Keene, Maya said. When this is done, when it's fully done, and the review board has what it needs, there's going to be a gap in command structure here. Multiple gaps potentially. Keene looked at her. The people who stayed, Maya said. The people who tried to do the right thing inside a system that kept making the right thing harder. Those people are going to need to be part of what replaces what gets removed. She held Keene's eyes. Make sure you're visible when they ask who should be in the room. Keene was quiet for a moment. That's a long way from a 30-day logistics rotation, she said. Yes, Maya said. It is. Something shifted in Keene's expression. The particular look of a person who has been carrying a thing alone for so long that the arrival of help feels slightly unreal, like the light changing in a room where someone has finally opened a window that was painted shut. Thank you, Keene said. Just those 2 words. Maya nodded once and went back to work. At 0900, she walked into Colonel Page's office without an appointment. His aide, a young lieutenant named Garvey, stood up from his desk with the automatic alarm of someone whose entire professional function was to prevent exactly this. Commander. I need 5 minutes with the Colonel, Maya said. It's time sensitive. Ma'am, the Colonel has a... Lieutenant Garvey. She looked at him directly. What I need to speak to the Colonel about will not improve by waiting, and it will not get simpler by being handled through your scheduling calendar. Please tell him I'm here. Something in her voice, not aggressive, not loud, just the specific gravity of complete certainty, made Garvey pick up his desk phone without further argument. 30 seconds later, she was inside. Page's office had the organized presentation of a man who cared how things appeared and had the resources to make sure they appeared well. Commendation service photographs, the controlled personal statement of a career arranged to make a particular impression. She looked at it all. Then she looked at Page. Howe was standing behind his desk, which told her he'd decided to handle this from a position of physical authority. He was 62 years old and had the posture of a man who had spent 3 decades being the most important person in every room he walked into. Carter, he said. This is irregular. Yes, sir, she said. I understand you've had some friction with personnel during your rotation. Colonel Page. Her voice was even. Quiet. Completely without the deference that a logistics officer would have offered a base commander, and she watched him feel the absence of it and begin to recalibrate. I'm here to tell you that a formal assessment has been submitted to Naval Special Warfare Command, documenting institutional failure at this base, covering the past 4 years. The assessment includes surveillance footage, parallel financial records, multiple witness accounts, and a communication cross-reference covering your personal consultations with base legal over the past 6 months. Page did not move. The case number is, she gave it to him, watched him recognize in the way senior officers recognize things when their institutional knowledge was sufficient exactly what that case number prefix meant. Which office? Which level? Which kind of investigation? His face went through 3 things. The first was the instinctive certainty that this could be managed. The second was the slower, colder recognition that the person in front of him had just given him a case number that indicated a review level he didn't have the relationships to manage. The third was something she recognized from Briggs's face in the mess hall corridor, the particular quality of a man encountering the limits of the thing he had always relied on. "Who are you?" he said. It was the 4th time she'd been asked that question in 5 days. She reached into the inside pocket of her uniform jacket and placed her actual identification on his desk. He looked at it. He picked it up. He read it the way you read something that reorients a significant portion of what you thought you understood about your current situation. "Commander," he said. His voice had changed. Lower. Less performance in it. "Sir," she said. "You've been here 5 days," he said. "Yes, sir. And in 5 days you've built a case that—" He stopped. Set the identification down. "How much do you have?" "Enough," she said. "And then considerably more than enough." He sat down. She had not expected that. Men like Page, in her experience, remained standing when they were cornered. Remaining standing was a way of not admitting the corner. But he sat, and in sitting, he became briefly less a colonel and more a 62-year-old man who had been making a particular kind of calculation for 4 years and had just arrived at the end of the math. "The weekly calls to legal," he said. "Yes, sir. I was trying to manage the complaints through proper legal channels," he said. "That's not the same as suppressing them, Colonel." She kept her voice even. "I'm not here to prosecute the case. I'm here to inform you that it exists and that it's been submitted. The review board will make all determinations of what the communication pattern means and what the appropriate response to it is." She paused. "What I am here to tell you is that cooperation with the review board, full unobstructed cooperation, is the only path through this that doesn't end your career with a characterization that follows your name for the rest of your life." Silence. "Horton," he said. "The review will include Sergeant Major Horton," she said. "Yes. He told me." Page stopped, closed his mouth, opened it again. "He represented to me that the complaint management process was standard administrative procedure, Colonel." She looked at him. "I'm going to say something and I need you to hear it clearly. The review board will assess your culpability based on what you knew and when you knew it and what you chose to do with that knowledge. My assessment, which is already submitted and which I cannot alter, reflects what the evidence shows. What you tell the review board about your understanding and your intent will be heard and weighed." She paused. "But only if you tell it to the review board. It won't help you if you tell it to me in this office." I understood what she was saying. She watched him understand it. "Page," she said, and her voice changed slightly. Not harder, quieter, more direct. "I've read your service record. All of it. Not the commendations, the operational record. 26 years of it before you took this command. You were a good officer." She looked at him steadily. "I think somewhere in the last 4 years you made a decision to prioritize the stability of this command over the integrity of it, and I think that decision felt small at the time and got progressively larger in ways you didn't fully track until it was very large indeed." She paused. "I'm not here to tell you what that makes you. That's not my determination to make. But I am telling you that the only thing that matters now is what you do next. A very long silence. What happens today, he said. The review panel will contact you through official channels within the next 72 hours, she said. In the meantime, Staff Sergeant Briggs is to be relieved of training duties pending administrative review, and Sergeant Major Horton is to be removed from supervisory authority over any personnel currently under investigation. She set a single sheet of paper on his desk. Those are the immediate interim actions. They fall within your authority as base commander, and they need to happen today. He looked at the sheet. He looked at her. If I don't, he said, then the review panel issues a preliminary directive that supersedes your command authority, she said. And that directive becomes part of the public record of this case. He picked up the sheet of paper. He pressed his intercom. Garvey, he said. Get me Horton and Briggs. Both of them. My office. 45 minutes. He released the button. He looked at Maya. She gathered her identification from the desk and put it back in her pocket. Commander, he said, for what it's worth. She waited. He looked like he was going to say several things and discarded all of them before settling on the one that was actually true. I'm sorry, he said. Not to you. To the people on this base who deserved better. She looked at him for a moment. That's the right thing to feel sorry for, she said. She walked out. The 45 minutes between Paige's intercom call and the scheduled meeting was the most precise piece of institutional silence Maya had ever moved through. She spent 12 minutes of it with Odom, who listened to everything she told him with the stillness of a man who had been waiting 6 years for this exact conversation and had decided a long time ago not to waste it on visible emotion. Mendez, he said when she finished, is being transferred, she said. Effective immediately. The motor pool assignment ends today. Odom was quiet for a moment. And the 2 transfer requests that disappeared, he said, will be reconstructed in the official record as having been administratively misfiled, she said. Which is accurate. And the misfilings will be attributed correctly. To Horton's office, he said. Yes. He nodded slowly. The 6 others, he said. The ones who were transferred out or separated. Their records will be reviewed by the panel, she said. I can't promise outcomes. I can tell you that the evidence supporting each of their accounts is part of the formal submission. He sat with that. 22 years, he said, not to her, to something he was doing privately. Then he looked up. It matters. What you've done here. I want to make sure I tell you that directly, because in my experience the people who actually do the work rarely hear it said plainly. Maya looked at him. In 18 years in 11 assignments across 4 countries and more institutional failures than she cared to catalog, nobody had ever said that to her directly. Not because they hadn't meant it. Because the work was invisible, and invisible work generated invisible gratitude, which was a professionally sensible arrangement and a personally lonesome one. She held his words for a moment. Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant, she said. Thank you, Commander, he said. The meeting in Paige's office at 10:45 lasted 11 minutes. Maya stood against the far wall and said nothing. She was there as a witness, not a participant. Paige had called the meeting, and Paige was running it, which was exactly what needed to happen. The authority needed to be seen to come from the institution, not from her. That was how accountability that stuck was built. Not through external force, but through the institution turning on itself cleanly enough that the accountability became internal. Horton walked in first. He saw Maya immediately. His expression didn't break. He had too much discipline for that, but something moved behind his eyes. A rapid recalculation. The look of a man running through everything he had said and done in the past 5 days, and measuring it against the sudden presence of a senior special operations officer standing in the base commander's office with the particular posture of someone who was not a temporary logistics rotation. Sergeant Major, Paige said. Sit down. Horton sat. Briggs came in 30 seconds later. He saw Horton. He saw Paige's expression. He saw Maya. He stood very still in the doorway for a full 3 seconds. Close the door, Paige said. Briggs closed the door and sat down. Page placed the interim action sheet on the desk. He spoke for 4 minutes. He said what needed to be said. The administrative review, the immediate duty modifications, the formal process that was already in motion above the base command level. He said it without editorializing, without blame sharing, without the kind of language that tried to distribute responsibility in ways that made the speaker feel less of it. Horton said, "This is premature." "It isn't," Page said. "It was overdue. And I'm the one saying that Marcus, not her, me." The use of the first name landed in the room with the particular weight of a relationship being publicly reclassified. Horton went very still. Briggs hadn't said anything yet. He was looking at the middle distance the way he had looked at Maya in the corridor the previous day, with the specific quality of a man who had been trying to decide something and had just run out of time to keep deciding. "Sir," he said. Page looked at him. "The JAG complaint," Briggs said. "I want to withdraw it." Horton's head turned sharply. Briggs didn't look at him. "I was coached on the language and the timing. I cooperated with that, and I shouldn't have. I want to withdraw it, and I want to say that clearly in whatever record is being kept." The room was extremely quiet. "Sergeant Major Horton coached you on the filing," Page said. "Yes, sir." Horton said, "Briggs." "Marcus." Page's voice was flat. "Don't." Horton closed his mouth. Something happened in the room that was hard to name and impossible to miss. The particular when a structure that has been held up by the weight of collective silence loses enough of the silence to begin to come down. Not all at once, not dramatically, just the first irrevocable shift of something that has been positioned against gravity for too long. Page looked at Maya. "Commander Carter," he said, "is there anything you need to add to this record?" She looked at the room. At Page sitting behind his desk with the posture of a man trying to carry an accounting he hadn't fully committed to yet. At Horton rigid in his chair with the quality of someone who has not yet decided which way to fall and is running out of floor. At Briggs, who was looking at his hands and breathing with the deliberate regularity of a man who has just done something that scared him and is waiting to find out whether it was the right thing. "No, sir," she said. "The record speaks for itself." She found Reyes at 1300. He was at lunch, not the outdoor table by the motor pool fence, his normal spot, but inside the main mess hall in the center section at a table with 3 other Marines. She saw him from the doorway. He didn't see her immediately. He was talking, not performing, not being loud, just talking, and the Marines around him were listening with the unguarded attention of people who are actually interested in what someone is saying. She watched for a moment. Then he looked up and saw her. She gave him a small nod. His expression moved through several things. Then he nodded back. She turned and walked away. She didn't need to tell him what the nod meant. He would find out through the base communication network, which was more efficient than any official channel within the hour. He would hear about the meetings. He would hear Briggs's name. He would hear about Mendez. And he would understand in the quiet way that he understood things that the mop had mattered. That the choice to do the right thing in a room full of people choosing not to had been part of something larger than itself. She hoped he would remember that. Not for her sake. For every room he walked into for the rest of his career. The formal identity disclosure happened at 1500. Not in a dramatic setting. Not in front of a formation. In the base conference room with Page present and a video link to the review panel, oversight officer, and Calloway and Keene and Odom, and a JAG representative who had been contacted that morning and arrived with the slightly breathless quality of someone who had been given very little time to prepare for a meeting, they understood mattered significantly. Maya placed her actual service record on the table. She placed the assessment document beside it. And then she spoke for 23 minutes. She did not use dramatic language. She did not editorialize or perform. She described in the flat, precise vocabulary of institutional analysis what she had found, how she had found it, and what the evidence demonstrated about the command culture at Naval Base Redstone over the past 4 years. She named names. She cited specific incidents with specific dates. She described the pattern of administrative misfiling, the coaching of JG complaints, the management of transfer paperwork, the suppression of medical incident reports, and the weekly legal consultations that had served not to address complaint management through legitimate process, but to monitor and shape the pace of that process in ways that protected specific personnel from accountability. She described what it had cost the people it was used against. She described Mendez spending 7 months in the motor pool. She described the 6 personnel who had been transferred out or separated. She described Ruiz filing anomaly flags for 12 months and watching them disappear. She described Odom sitting in the NCO lounge for 6 years with 22 years of professional integrity and 14 months of documentation that nobody had thought worth collecting. She said it all plainly. And when she finished, the room was quiet, in the way that rooms were quiet when something true had been said in them that was large enough to take up most of the available space. The JAG representative cleared his throat. "Commander Carter, your actual assignment here. Authorized by Naval Special Warfare Command, under Directive 7 Alpha," she said. "The case number and authorization chain are in the appendix of the assessment. And you've been here 5 days," Calloway said. His voice had the quality of a man realizing in real time the full implications of something he had contributed to by omission. 5 days, she confirmed. And in 5 days, with the assistance of people who had been collecting evidence for between 11 and 22 months before I arrived, she said. She looked at him directly. "I want to be very clear about that. I assembled the case. I did not generate the evidence. The evidence was generated by the integrity of the people on this base who kept trying to do the right thing through the right channels and were blocked at every turn." She paused. "They did the work. I gave it somewhere to go." Calloway looked at the table. Keene, sitting 2 chairs down, did not look at the table. She looked at Maya with an expression that was not triumph and not relief, but the particular quality of a person who has been holding a thing upright through sheer force of will for a very long time, and has just been told they can set it down. Page at the head of the table said, "The review panel's interim authority supersedes my command, effective immediately pending full review. I understand and accept that." He said it with the particular discipline of a man trying to do the last right thing inside a situation where he had not done enough right things, and it was not adequate to what had happened, and he knew that, and saying it anyway was the only thing he had left to offer. The JAG representative was already making notes. The oversight officer on the video link was already outlining next steps. The room was already becoming a different kind of room than it had been an hour ago. She was packed by 1900. Her rotation technically had 19 days remaining, but the operative phase was complete, and continued presence served no additional investigative function, and the review panel oversight officer had been explicit. The investigation was now in formal hands, and Maya's most useful contribution from this point forward was the written record she had already submitted. Not her physical presence at a base where her identity was now known and her cover was fully dissolved. She had one stop before the vehicle came. Mendez was in the barracks. His own barracks, not the motor pool assignment, because Page had signed the transfer order at 11:30, and someone had processed it with unusual speed, as people processed things when they understood the winds had shifted. She knocked. He opened the door. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You're leaving." "Yes," she said. "Is it?" He paused. "Is it done?" "The review is beginning," she said, "which is different from done. It will take months, and it will be difficult in the way formal reviews are difficult, public and slow, and occasionally frustrating. But the evidence is in the right hands. The right people are going to be asked the right questions with full knowledge of what the answers need to be." She held his eyes. "Your account is part of the formal record, protected, unalterable." He leaned against the doorframe. 7 months, he said. "I know," she said. "I kept thinking if I'd pushed harder, filed again after the second one disappeared, made more noise." He paused. "I thought maybe I just wasn't brave enough." "Mendez." She looked at him directly. "You told me the truth in the middle of a base lunch sitting across from a woman you'd known for 48 hours. You told me about Horton knowing about what he said to you about the file you saw with your own eyes. You did that with no guarantee of what would happen to you as a result." She paused. That's not a person who isn't brave enough." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Who are you, actually?" And this time, because the cover was dissolved and the case was submitted and there was nothing left to protect, she told him. Not everything. Not the places with no public names. But enough. Her actual rank. Her actual assignment designation. What the program was and what it did and why people like her existed, moving through institutions, looking for the fractures that the institutions couldn't see from inside. He listened. When she finished, he said, "You did all of that in 5 days. I had help," she said. "Good people who'd been doing the work for years before I got here." He nodded slowly. Then, the promotion evaluation. The one that said I lacked assertiveness. She looked at him. "Will that?" "It will be reviewed," she said, "by people who will have full context for who wrote it and why and what it was designed to accomplish." She paused. "I can't guarantee an outcome. I can tell you that the evaluation will not stand unchallenged." He exhaled. It was the particular exhale of a person releasing something they have been holding in their body for so long, it has become part of the structure of their breathing. "Thank you, Commander," he said. "Thank you, Corporal," she said. "For the lunch conversation, for the truth, for not having quit." She shook his hand. She walked back to the visiting officer quarters, picked up her duffel, and walked to the gate. The vehicle was waiting. Odom was standing near the gate when she came through. He wasn't waiting for her, or if he was doing it in the way he did everything, with the kind of unobtrusive presence that looked like coincidence if you weren't paying attention. He said nothing. She said nothing. She gave him one nod. He returned it. It was enough. The vehicle pulled away from Naval Base Redstone at 1923. Maya sat in the back with her duffel and her classified notebook and the secure phone that was already showing 3 messages from the next assignment file that had been opened while she was still running the current one. She didn't open the messages yet. She looked out the window at the base receding behind the vehicle and thought about 5 days. The tray on the floor. The 200 people who had laughed and the one who had gotten a mop. The 14 months of parallel documentation sitting in Ruiz's locked personal drive. The 22 years of professional integrity that Odom had been carrying without knowing who to give it to. The 7 months Mendez had spent by a chain-link fence because 2 pieces of paper had been made to disappear. She thought about Keene saying, "There is no careful way." She thought about Reyes in the center of the mess hall at 1300, talking to 3 Marines who were listening. She thought about what Page had said when she was leaving his office. "I'm sorry. Not to you. To the people on this base who deserved better. It wasn't enough. It was not close to enough for the years it had been built on. But it was the right direction, and right direction was where change began. Not in the dramatic moments, not in the big rooms with the oversight officers and the video links and the formal records, but in the quiet interior moment when a person in a position of power looked at what they had chosen and said plainly, without excuse, that they had chosen wrong. She opened her notebook to a fresh page. She wrote the date. She wrote Redstone complete. Then she wrote Reyes, Mendez, Ruiz, Odom, Keene. She wrote their names not as file identifiers, but as what they were, 5 people who had held something true in an environment designed to make the truth hard to hold, and had kept holding it until someone arrived who could carry it the rest of the way. She closed the notebook. She picked up the phone. She opened the next assignment file. A new base. A new cover. A new set of names and records, and informal power structures, and small daily cruelties being absorbed by good people who hadn't yet found somewhere to deliver what they'd been carrying. She was not finished. She had never been finished. Because the work did not end with any single case, any single base, any single commanding officer being called to account. The work continued because institutions were not changed by moments. They were changed by the slow, unglamorous accumulation of moments. By the people who showed up quietly and read the records and ate lunch by chain-link fences and asked the right questions at the right time and made sure when the truth was finally ready to move that it had somewhere to go. The vehicle moved through the dark. Maya Carter, Commander, United States Navy Naval Special Warfare, cleared above top secret. Decorated in places that had no public record, known by name, to fewer than 40 people who fully understood what she did, sat in the back of a vehicle on a highway at night, reading the next file, and she was nobody important, and she was exactly where she was supposed to be. That was always how it worked. The strongest ones were never the ones making the most noise. They were the ones working quietly in the places where the noise was loudest, holding the truth steady until the people around them were finally ready to face it, and then making absolutely certain that when that moment came, the truth was too well documented, too corroborated, and too completely assembled to be made to disappear. That was the job. That had always been the job. And Maya Carter was very, very good at it.